Seamus. What do you think of this thing? Hi, welcome to another episode of Hack a Week. We are back at it with some more Parallax stuff. The Elev-8 Quad Copter. We're going to get started on this week. We're going to open up the box, see what's inside, find out what kind of stuff we need to build it with. Seamus is pretty anxious to get started here. We're just going to talk basically about what it's going to take to get started with it, kind of an overview of the process that it'll take to build this thing, and get started on the basics of it. This will be a multi-part series on building this, and I still need to get the radio for it and such, but we've got enough here to get started, so let's have at it. Alright, here's the box, and let's open it up and see what we've got inside here. Oh, look at that! Right here we've got a little list already that's pretty handy of all of the tools and supplies required to build this thing. It's really not that much. Let's take a quick look at this. You need a number 1 Phillips screwdriver. You'll need a 1/4-inch wrench or box end socket. I've got a 1/4-inch nut driver. An 11/32 wrench or nut driver. Have one of those too. A soldering iron. Of course, I've got my soldering iron here at the bench. A pair of scissors, we have that. Wire strippers, and they need to go from 12 to 16 gauge wire, no problem there, got that covered. A pair of wire cutters, got some of those here. And let's see, needle nose pliers, got needle nose pliers here with wire cutters in them also. And a heat gun or lighter to melt the heat shrink tubing, and I usually like to just use my soldering iron to do that. So that's all you need to build this thing, this simple set of tools right here. Let's put that aside, slide this thing out of the box, see what we got here. Nicely packaged up goodies. So this would be the hoverfly, and that is the board that goes on the quadcopter and basically monitors everything that's going on. It's got a propeller microcontroller right there in the middle, and there's an accelerometer on board, and it helps correct for strange pitch changes and keep the craft stable. And it also is the interface between you and the servos when you're flying the thing. We've got all the bag of hardware here, all kinds of goodies. This stuff looks like it's stainless steel, if I'm not mistaken. All kinds of things in there, wire ties and straps, etc. Here's the electronics kit. Ooh, that's pretty hefty. There's all the motors. Ooh, they look pretty cool. Let's take a little closer look at some of that stuff in there. Where's my X-Acto? See if I can do this without cutting my fingers like I did in one of my recent hacks. So there's a little closer look at the motors. Those are pretty nice looking. So we've got motors in here. We've got all kinds of wire going on, all of the connectors and speed, I think these are the speed control modules if I'm not mistaken. The motor drivers, there's 4 of them, so, and there's all the solderable connectors for all that stuff. Heat shrink tubing, hardware like the propellers, not the propeller chip, but the propellers, the blades that will make the thing fly. And let's see, moving right along. Oh, look at this. We even get 2 pairs of safety glasses. How cool is that? And this is the Airframe Kit. This is everything that makes up that weird looking spidery airframe. There's the bottom piece right there with all kinds of extra provisions to mount things to, like a camera and such, which I will be doing. I bought a GoPro camera recently just for this thing, so that I can mount it up to it and take some cool videos once I get it all built. So that's what's in the box. And then on the Parallax website, I found the links to download the PDFs for the drawings and the assembly guide. There's the propeller assembly, exploded view, there's all the parts. So it's not so much like it's a step-by-step like building a model. it's more of just here's all the pictures, here's all the parts, here's how they go together, and then we have an assembly guide here that I printed out as well. These are all available for download on the Parallax website, and there's how all of the stuff goes together for the main body and the control board. The hoverfly goes on that, and then the assembly guide right here, and it gets started by basically the motor propeller assembly, just like we have here on the guide. So if you start with these drawings here and just keep them at your workbench and set them over here like this and read the instructions like this and grab all your parts as you go, you will be building a quadcopter. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Let's start with the motor assembly. Everything is right here in the package. There is this bracket that is a bit confusing because it's nowhere to be seen in the instructions, and I had to do a bit of research to figure out that you don't use it. You don't use that, and you don't use these little black set screws that are in here. You will use this little cone piece that holds the prop onto the motor. You will also use, in this step, the Loctite 242 that came with the kit, and here's the brackets that the motor will mount to. You'll also need a 1/16 Allen. That's not on the side of the box either, on the tools required. But anyway, the reason you need that is you need to put blue Loctite on these two little Allen set screws. There's one right there, and there's also one right there. So you back those out and put a little Loctite on there and tighten those up, because I guess they have been known to come loose. What you're doing is you're mounting this to the armature of the motor, and then this part gets mounted to the plate, and so this entire assembly will spin with the prop. So let's take those out one at a time, and then we'll just break open our tube of Loctite here carefully. It's going to want to go all over the place, I just know it. There we go. Alright, just a little dab of Loctite, tiny bit is all it takes, and we'll put that back in. Don't take them both out at once, because you know you've already got the thing in place and adjusted, so you might as well leave it. So we'll put the first one in, and let's give that a real good snug up. Oops, jumped right out of my hand. Let's try that one more time. Make sure that Allen is in there all the way. Hang on tight. Good and snug. Okay, now let's get the next one, and then we will tighten that one up. Alright, nice and snug. Now let's put all this assembly together and a prop. Now it's time to put the propellers on the motor. So out of that box of goodies there are these three parts, and this right here is the collet. That's what goes on to the motor shaft, and that just slides on there like so. Then we have this little part. This is the cone lock with the flange pointing away from the motor. That slides on, and it has a taper, so as you tighten it down, the collet will clamp down onto the motor shaft. So let's look at the propellers now. The propellers came with all of these different shims for different sized shafts. So you pick the one that fits right here on the collet, and let's see, it turns out to be that it is that one. So let's break that out of the little plastic tree there, and we'll take an X-Acto knife and just clean off that little bit of flashing that's left over. We want this to be nice and neat, at least I do. Now you're going to insert that into the propeller, into the side with the little recess in it right there. You just drop it in like that, and what that's going to do is center the propeller onto the motor shaft. And by the way, none of that stuff is in the instructions on the build. It's a guide, like I said, so you have to kind of keep your wits about you and watch this video. this will help you out a lot. Now we can just put the Allen that we used to tighten up the set screws right through that little hole on the propeller nut and tighten that sucker down. And we're going to crank that down pretty tight because we want that propeller to stay in place. There we go. One mounted up propeller. Next up, we're going to solder some 16 gauge wire to each one of these leads right here, and we will heat shrink them. So first let's cut 3 pieces 12 inches long, one piece for each lead. Of course, once you have one cut, you can use that as a gauge to cut the other 2. I suppose if you wanted to, you could cut all of them at this time, but we're just going to go through this step by step. Okay, there's my 3 pieces. Now I need to strip the ends of those about 1/4 of an inch from each end. I have them all stripped. Now I'm going to twist the wire up a little bit on each one of those that I stripped in preparation for tinning them with some solder. I like to use the Kester 44, good stuff. Third hand tool is real convenient right here. So we'll just go ahead and tin this with some solder. Get the wire hot enough to melt the solder, that's the trick. And we'll do that to all 6 ends. Now let's cut some heat shrink tubing about a 1/2 inch length of the 1/4 inch heat shrink tubing, and we need 3 of those pieces. There we go. We have those ready to go. Now let's go ahead and put the wires of the motor into the third hand tool. And then what I'm going to do is solder, whoops, let's get a little fresh tin on that wire. And then I will solder one end of one of the 16 gauge wires to that lead. Get a nice clean joint there. I'll let that cool down. Now let's slide one of our pieces of heat shrink onto the other end of the wire. And I'll slide it up in place, and then you can use a heat gun, a lighter, or, as I like to do, my soldering iron to shrink the heat shrink around the wire. I just hold the soldering iron right up next to it, move it back and forth, and it does the trick. I suppose you could use a hair dryer too, it would just take quite a bit longer. If you have one of those little butane soldering irons that has the hot air tip, that would also be handy. Now let's repeat that for the other 2 wires. Okay, all 3 wires are soldered up to the motor. Yes, that's right, I said soldered, because the rest of the world says soldered and only us wacky Americans say solder. So I'm going to buck the trend and start saying solder. How about that? So what has to happen next is the boom assembly is going to go together, but we have to put this really cool checkerboard stuff around the booms, and it comes with some black and some red. And the reason for this is so that when it's in the sky flying around, you have some sense of orientation of left, right, forward, backwards. So what I found is the squares, 4 of these rows perfectly wrap around the boom. So I am going to cut from that end right at 4 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll cut it right on that line. then I'm going to take the boom assembly, lay it down here, and I'll peel back the sticky back here carefully. And I'll lay that down like so, and just basically center it between the screw holes that you see here. So it's really important to get it straight, so you can just kind of use your eyeballs, line up the edge of the tube with the edge of the sticky stuff, and roll it like this until it's all rolled up. This is a piece of foam board that I'm working on here on all my Parallax projects, and it's really handy stuff. Look at that, that's where the seam is right there. It lines up perfectly. Gee, you think they maybe planned that when they did the graphics for this thing? So you repeat that for all four, but again, for now, we're just going to work on one boom assembly at a time. Okay, it's time to build the boom assembly, so here's the drawing for that. Has everything laid out here, all the screws are labeled, and over here are what they are, how long they are, if they're stainless or not, and the quantity of how many you need. So I've kind of got everything all worked out here in a nice little pile, and moved it out of the hardware bag. I took everything that was in the hardware bag, by the way, and put it in a little extra tray I have. Makes it a little bit easier to sort out. So let's put all that stuff over here, and then we'll get started. Okay, there's a few things to pay attention to here. First, this plate needs to go on first, because it's on the other side of where this plate is going to go. So obviously it needs to drop onto there first and just stay there like that. Now these holes are a little strange. They're offset just a bit. If you notice, let me get a pointing device here, you'll see that the distance from this hole to that hole is a little bit shorter than the distance from this one to that one. You need to pay attention to how those are oriented, because you want the wires to come back this way toward the narrow end of this assembly. So you need to hold it up there and make sure you've got it facing the right way. If it's not, it doesn't want to line up with the holes in the motor right, and you'll wonder what's going on. So make sure you've got that oriented properly. Okay, got it? Good. Now, the next thing is the Loctite that has to go on these. Now I noticed that the holes weren't quite big enough to just push the screw through, so I ran them through like this ahead of time. So let's do that. The other alternative, I suppose, is you could punch those holes out a bit bigger, but the idea of this is that you've got a nice tight fit on those holes with the screws, and there's no play whatsoever, because these screws are really important. They hold the whole motor assembly to the boom, and the vibration such that goes on, they can be loosened, so they will get Loctite. These are the other screws in the assembly that get some Loctite. So let's get all four of those put in and poking out the other side. Okay, now let's get the Loctite out, and we'll put just a little bit. A little bit of this goes a long ways, doesn't take much. One little drop on each screw, and I'll drop it down onto the motor assembly here. And as I tighten these, of course I don't want to just start tightening one and take it all the way down, because these screws are locked into the plastic a bit. So we'll just get one started, and we'll get another one started, and another one. You get the idea. And basically just slowly work your way around. I'm getting tongue-tied here. And tighten them down nice and even until you get them all the way snug. There we go, good and tight, all four of them. Now it's time for the boom to go on. So first you will take the wires and put them through the boom, and the end that goes on there is the end that has the two holes closest together. So let's push the wires on through. Da boom. Put this all the way up there. Now you're going to take one of these 1-inch screws and you're going to push it down through the boom, and you have to be careful because you're probably going to run into the wires on the way through, so it's best to move this aside a bit so you can see the screw. There you go. And then push it through the hole in the bottom. It's a little tricky getting everything lined up here. There we go. Now we've got that screw protruding through, and we're going to put a nut on that and a washer. Nope, no washer on that, sorry. Scratch that. So we'll put the nut on it, the 1/4-inch nut, and we'll just leave it loose for now. Now we need to get the screws that go into here through this spacer in place, like so. So what happens is that spacer actually has threads in it. Can you see those threads around my weird, gross fingernails? There's threads in there. So let's put this piece in, like so. And if you just kind of squeeze the two halves together with your fingers, you can kind of hold it in place. And now you're going to use one of the 3/8 stainless steel screws and one of these little lock washers. You put that on there and go ahead and get that screw started into that spacer. Should thread in fairly easy. There we go. Once you get one locked down that way, things get a little bit easier because everything starts to hold together quite well. So let's put the other one in place. Get a washer on there. Another 3/8 screw. And we'll get that one started. Alright, that's the bottom. Now let's just flip the whole assembly over and repeat that same thing for the top. Okay, those are in there loose, not tight yet. Now we're going to take the other 1-inch stainless screw that we had set aside and put that through here. And it's going to poke out the bottom right there. Now that assembly, that screw goes into this assembly right here. This is one of the legs. And you'll see they'll line up with the other hole down here as well. And we're going to put the shorter end toward the motor. And this should tap right into there as well. Let's squeeze that into place and tighten that up. And sure enough, you can feel it grabbing into that plastic nice and tight. Okay, let's just leave that good and snug for now. Now we get our 1/4-inch nut driver here and screw assembly. Just good and snug. You don't want to crush the tubing. Now let's take the needle nose pliers and hold this spacer right here, and we'll tighten up all 4 of these screws on each side. And there it is. One completed boom assembly with the wires soldered to the motor, the propeller on the motor, the Loctite on the set screws and on these 4 screws on the back, and the landing foot it's in place, and then the wires coming out the back. So that's the end of part 1 of the assembly of the Propeller Elev-8 Quad Copter. You need to repeat this whole thing now 4 times, and you'll have all 4 of your booms built, and they'll be ready to mount up to the centerpiece, and that's the next video that we'll do. So there you go, and until next time, keep on hacking.